The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bellecourt, the flagship restaurant that had made Marcus Rivera a name whispered with respect in culinary circles across the city. He strutted through the dining room with the confidence of a man who believed his own publicity, adjusting his Armani tie as he surveyed what he considered his kingdom. The pristine white tablecloths and gleaming silverware caught the light just so, creating an atmosphere that had earned 3 James Beard nominations and a waiting list that stretched months into the future. Behind the hostess station, Maria Rivera moved with quiet efficiency, her movements practiced and purposeful as she reviewed the evening's reservations. When she noticed the new server struggling with the complex wine pairing system, she approached with gentle guidance, explaining the subtle differences between their sommelier selections in a way that made the young woman's eyes light up with understanding. Whether you're watching from New York or Nevada, from Texas or Tennessee, you've probably seen this dynamic before in your own workplace, that quiet competence that goes unrecognized while louder voices take credit. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, and if you've ever worked alongside someone whose contributions were overlooked. Marcus barely glanced in their direction as he passed, his attention focused on the leather-bound folder containing this morning's vendor proposals. His voice carried across the dining room as he spoke into his phone, discussing expansion plans with investors who hung on his every word. He had perfected the art of looking important, gesturing dramatically as he described his vision for Mediterranean cuisine that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The investors loved his passion, his confidence, his ability to paint pictures of profitable futures. What they couldn't see was Maria quietly slipping into the kitchen to resolve a supplier crisis that threatened to derail the evening service. The organic produce vendor had delivered substandard vegetables, and the head chef was beginning to panic. Maria calmly pulled out her phone, speed-dialing the backup supplier she had cultivated relationships with over years of careful networking. Within minutes, she had arranged for premium ingredients to be delivered within the hour, negotiating a price that would maintain their profit margins. Marcus concluded his phone call and strode toward the kitchen, ready to address what he assumed would be a crisis requiring his intervention. He found instead a calm, organized workspace where prep was proceeding smoothly. The head chef, Elena, looked up from her station with relief evident on her face. She started to explain how Maria had resolved the supply issue, but Marcus waved dismissively, already moving toward his office. In the private dining room where Marcus held court with potential investors, Maria appeared with a silver tray bearing perfectly prepared coffee service. She moved silently around the table, placing delicate porcelain cups before each guest with practiced grace. The investors barely acknowledged her presence, their attention fixed on Marcus as he outlined his expansion strategy with theatrical gestures and carefully chosen words. One of the investors, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, leaned forward with interest as Marcus described his approach to staff management. Marcus puffed out his chest slightly, warming to a favorite topic. He explained how important it was to maintain clear hierarchies, to ensure that every employee understood their place and their limitations. The key to his success, he insisted, was surrounding himself with people who knew how to follow instructions rather than pretending to have ideas above their station. Maria continued her quiet circuit around the table, refilling water glasses and ensuring the meeting proceeded without interruption. Her expression remained neutral, professional, giving no indication that she was absorbing every word of the conversation. The investors nodded approvingly at Marcus's management philosophy, impressed by his authoritative demeanor and clear vision for growth. After the meeting concluded and the investors departed with warm handshakes and promises to discuss the proposal with their partners, Marcus turned to Maria with the casual dismissiveness he had perfected over their 8 years of marriage. He reminded her that the evening service would be particularly challenging, with 3 VIP tables and a food critic rumored to be dining anonymously. He needed her to handle the simple front-of-house tasks so he could focus on the real business of ensuring everything met his exacting standards. Maria nodded quietly, already mentally organizing the complex choreography required to deliver flawless service to nearly 200 guests. She understood the dietary restrictions of the regular customers, the seating preferences of the VIPs, and the subtle cues that would help identify the critic if they appeared. Her years of experience had taught her to anticipate problems before they arose, to smooth potential conflicts before they could disrupt the evening's rhythm. As the dinner service began, Marcus positioned himself prominently in the dining room, making rounds to key tables with practiced charm. He greeted regular customers by name, inquired about their families, and made thoughtful recommendations from the menu he claimed to have personally curated. His performance was flawless, the epitome of the Hansen owner who cared deeply about every guest's experience. Meanwhile, Maria orchestrated the complex ballet of service from her position near the kitchen, communicating with servers through subtle hand signals and quiet words that kept the operation flowing smoothly. When the critic was finally identified at table 12, she discreetly alerted the kitchen staff and adjusted the server rotation to ensure their experience would be perfect. Her movements were economical, purposeful, nearly invisible to the diners who were focused on the theatrical presentation Marcus provided. The evening concluded with universal praise for the exceptional service and innovative cuisine. Marcus basked in the compliments, accepting congratulations from satisfied guests who promised to spread word of their outstanding experience. He moved through the dining room like a conquering hero, his chest swelling with pride at what he had accomplished through his vision and leadership. In the quiet moments after the last guest departed, as the staff completed their closing duties, Marcus made his announcement. He wanted a divorce, he declared to Maria with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. More importantly, he intended to claim full ownership of the restaurant empire they had built together. After all, he reasoned, these establishments existed because of his entrepreneurial spirit, his culinary vision, his business acumen. Maria had been fortunate to be along for the ride, but now it was time for her to understand that she had never been more than a passenger in his journey toward success. The mahogany-paneled law office of Hartwell, Blackstone and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of downtown's most prestigious business tower, its panoramic windows offering views that commanded respect and inspired confidence in clients willing to pay premium rates for legal expertise. Marcus Rivera sat across from senior partner Jonathan Blackstone, a man whose silver hair and Seville Row suits had intimidated opposing counsel in courtrooms across the state for over 2 decades. The leather briefcase beside Marcus bulged with documents that he believed would secure his complete victory in what he considered a simple matter of protecting his assets from an opportunistic spouse. Blackstone reviewed the preliminary paperwork with the practiced eye of someone who had handled hundreds of high-stakes divorces, nodding approvingly as Marcus outlined his position. The case seemed straightforward enough. Successful entrepreneur seeks to retain control of business empire built through his own vision and effort, while preventing former spouse from claiming undeserved ownership of assets she had no hand in creating. Marcus painted the picture with broad, confident strokes, describing Maria as someone who had been content to play hostess while he handled the real work of building their restaurant empire. The narrative Marcus constructed was compelling in its simplicity. He had identified the market opportunity, secured the initial funding, negotiated the lease terms, and established the operational frameworks that had turned a single restaurant into a multi-location enterprise worth millions. Maria had been supportive, certainly, greeting customers and managing simple administrative tasks, but she had never demonstrated the business acumen or entrepreneurial drive necessary to claim partnership in his achievements. Blackstone's associate, a sharp-eyed young woman named Patricia Chun, took detailed notes as Marcus provided what he considered irrefutable evidence of his sole ownership. All business accounts bore his name exclusively. All loan documents listed him as the primary applicant. All vendor contracts showed his signature on behalf of the corporation he had established. The paper trail, he insisted, would speak for itself when presented before a judge who understood the difference between a business owner and a supportive spouse. Across town, Maria sat in the modest office of Sarah Martinez, a family law attorney whose reputation for thorough preparation had earned respect among her peers despite her preference for representing clients who couldn't afford Blackstone's fees. The contrast between their meeting spaces was stark. Where Marcus had spread documents across an imposing conference table, Maria carried only a simple manila folder and spoke in measured tones about her situation. Sarah listened carefully as Maria described the divorce proceedings that Marcus had initiated, noting the calm confidence in her client's voice that seemed unusual for someone facing such aggressive legal action. Most spouses in Maria's position would be anxious, emotional, desperate to understand their rights and options. Instead, Maria asked specific questions about document discovery procedures, timeline requirements for evidence submission, and the precedents that govern business asset division in cases involving family enterprises. The questions surprised Sarah with their sophistication and precision. Maria inquired about the legal standards for proving financial contribution to marital assets, the requirements for demonstrating operational control in business partnerships, and the procedures for compelling production of financial records that might not be readily available through standard discovery channels. These were not the concerns of someone unfamiliar with legal proceedings or business operations. Meanwhile, Marcus was holding court at Bellecourt's bar area, regaling his business partners and restaurant industry colleagues with confident predictions about the divorce proceedings. He described Maria's legal representation as adequate for someone in her position, but hardly a match for the expertise he had secured. The audience of successful entrepreneurs and investors nodded sympathetically, understanding the challenges that came with protecting hard-earned assets from claims they considered unreasonable. Marcus's certainty was infectious as he outlined his strategy for maintaining complete control of the business empire. He explained how the documentation would clearly demonstrate his role as the driving force behind every major decision, every successful expansion, every innovation that had elevated their restaurants above the competition. Maria would receive fair compensation for her years of support, but she would not be permitted to claim ownership of enterprises she had never truly understood or managed. The restaurant staff observed these developments with growing concern, particularly those who had worked closely with Maria over the years. Head chef Elena found herself remembering the countless times Maria had resolved supplier crises, negotiated better terms with vendors, and implemented operational improvements that had increased both efficiency and profitability. Sous chef Daniel recalled how Maria had designed the training programs that had reduced staff turnover and improved service quality across all locations. General Manager Robert quietly shared his worries with the assistant manager, recounting how Maria had been instrumental in selecting prime real estate locations, timing market entries for maximum impact, and building relationships with food critics and industry influencers who had elevated their reputation. The idea that she had been merely decorative seemed absurd to those who had witnessed her contributions firsthand. Back in Blackstone's office, the legal strategy session continued with Marcus providing additional context about his wife's background and capabilities. He described her as someone who had been fortunate to marry into opportunity, lacking the education or experience necessary to contribute meaningfully to complex business operations. She had been content to handle simple social interactions while leaving the important decisions to someone with proper qualifications and vision. Blackstone's questions were designed to identify potential weaknesses in Marcus's position, but the answers seemed to reinforce the strength of his case. Maria had no formal business education that Marcus knew of, no previous entrepreneurial experience, no independent financial resources that might complicate the asset division. She appeared to be exactly what Marcus described, a supportive spouse who had benefited from his success without contributing to its creation. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month, giving both sides time to prepare their presentations and gather supporting documentation. Marcus left Blackstone's office with supreme confidence, already planning how he would celebrate when the judge confirmed what seemed obvious to anyone who understood business. He had built the restaurant empire through his own efforts, and he deserved to retain complete control over what he had created. That evening, Marcus hosted an informal gathering at Bellecourt, inviting friends and colleagues to toast what he considered his inevitable victory. He raised his glass of Dom Perignon with theatrical flourish, declaring that justice would prevail when qualified legal professionals examined the evidence. Maria would be fortunate to receive reasonable alimony, but she would finally understand that her role had always been peripheral to the real work of building a business empire. The assembled guests laughed and applauded, enjoying both the premium champagne and the entertainment value of Marcus's confident predictions. None of them noticed Maria in her small apartment across town, quietly reviewing documents by lamplight, her expression calm and focused as she prepared for proceedings that would soon reveal truths that Marcus had somehow managed to overlook entirely. The courtroom of Judge Catherine Morrison had witnessed countless divorce proceedings over her 15 years on the bench, but few cases had arrived with such apparent clarity of outcome. The Mahogany Gallery was packed with observers from the restaurant industry, curious to see how one of their most successful colleagues would fare in what seemed like a straightforward asset protection case. Marcus Rivera sat confidently at the plaintiff's table, his expensive suit and authoritative posture projecting the image of a successful businessman defending his life's work. Jonathan Blackstone rose from his chair with the practiced grace of a veteran litigator, his opening statement delivered with the conviction of someone presenting an airtight case. He outlined the chronological development of the Rivera restaurant empire, beginning with Marcus's identification of an underserved market segment and his bold decision to risk everything on a vision that others had dismissed as overly ambitious. The timeline he presented painted a clear picture of entrepreneurial determination overcoming initial skepticism through careful planning and relentless execution. The financial documentation that Blackstone introduced seemed to support every element of Marcus's narrative. Bank records showed the original business loan application bearing solely Marcus's signature, with his personal credit history and projected income serving as the foundation for the lending decision. Corporate formation documents listed Marcus as the sole founder and chief executive officer, with no mention of any partner or co-founder who might claim equal standing in the business structure. Blackstone methodically walked the court through each phase of the restaurant empire's expansion, highlighting Marcus's role in every major decision. The selection of prime real estate locations had required Marcus's keen understanding of demographic trends and foot traffic patterns. The development of signature menu items reflected Marcus's sophisticated palate and understanding of regional taste preferences. The hiring and training of key personnel demonstrated Marcus's ability to identify talent and create systems that maintained quality standards across multiple locations. When Marcus took the witness stand, his testimony radiated the confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. He described his entrepreneurial journey with the passion of a true believer, explaining how his vision for Mediterranean cuisine had evolved from childhood memories of his grandmother's cooking into a sophisticated business model that honored tradition while embracing innovation. His voice carried across the courtroom as he detailed the challenges of securing initial funding, the complexities of navigating health department regulations, and the satisfaction of seeing his first location exceed all projected revenue targets. Judge Morrison listened attentively as Marcus outlined his business philosophy and management approach. He emphasized the importance of maintaining personal oversight of every significant decision, explaining how his Hanson leadership style had been crucial to establishing the reputation for excellence that distinguished his restaurants from countless competitors. The judge's questions were thorough but seemed to accept the basic premise that Marcus had been the driving force behind the enterprise's success. When Blackstone directed Marcus's attention to his wife's role in the business operations, his tone shifted to one of affectionate dismissal. He acknowledged that Maria had been wonderfully supportive throughout their marriage, greeting customers with warmth and helping to create the welcoming atmosphere that kept guests returning. She had assisted with interior decorating decisions and occasionally helped coordinate special events. But these contributions, while appreciated, hardly constituted the kind of strategic involvement that would justify ownership claims. Marcus explained to the court that Maria had never expressed interest in the complex financial and operational aspects of running a restaurant business. She preferred to focus on the social elements, the personal interactions with guests and staff that came naturally to her pleasant personality. He had tried occasionally to involve her in budget discussions or expansion planning meetings, but her eyes would glaze over when the conversation turned to profit margins, cash flow projections, or market analysis. The questioning continued with Marcus providing specific examples of his exclusive responsibility for all major business decisions. He had personally negotiated every lease agreement, selected every contractor for renovation projects, and approved every significant expenditure. When supply chain disruptions had threatened operations, he had worked around the clock to identify alternative vendors and maintain service standards. When economic downturns had pressured profit margins, he had implemented cost control measures and efficiency improvements that had kept the business profitable. Blackstone's presentation of supporting evidence seemed overwhelming in its thoroughness. Vendor contracts bore Marcus's signature exclusively. Insurance policies listed him as the sole policyholder and beneficiary. Tax returns showed him as the sole proprietor claiming business income and deductions. Employment records indicated that all hiring decisions had been made by Marcus, with staff evaluations and disciplinary actions conducted under his authority. At the defense table, Sarah Martinez sat with remarkable composure despite the seemingly devastating testimony being presented against her client. Her note-taking was methodical, but she showed no signs of the panic or desperation that might be expected from an attorney watching her case collapse in real time. Maria sat beside her with equal calm, occasionally leaning over to whisper brief comments or request specific clarifications about the testimony. What puzzled observers was the nature of Maria's questions to her attorney. Rather than expressing concern about the damaging evidence being presented, she asked about specific financial documents that seemed tangential to the main issues. She inquired about the procedures for obtaining banking records from multiple institutions, the timeline for subpoenaing vendor correspondence, and the requirements for authenticating corporate documentation that might not have been included in the initial discovery process. Judge Morrison noticed the defendant's unusual behavior and made notes about the specific document requests that Maria seemed particularly interested in pursuing. Most parties in her position would be focused on damage control or emotional appeals, but Maria's approach seemed more systematic, almost clinical in its attention to procedural details that appeared unrelated to the central question of business ownership. As Marcus concluded his testimony with increasingly confident assertions about his sole responsibility for building the restaurant empire, he began to inject subtle humor into his responses. He joked about having to explain basic business concepts to Maria, describing her confusion when confronted with financial statements or market analysis reports. The gallery chuckled appreciatively at his gentle mockery of his wife's supposed limitations, viewing it as endearing rather than malicious. Marcus's final comments to the court emphasized his hope that Maria would eventually understand the distinction between being supportive and being essential to a business's success. He expressed confidence that any reasonable examination of the evidence would confirm what seemed obvious to everyone familiar with their situation. He had built the restaurant empire through his own vision, effort, and expertise, while Maria had been fortunate to benefit from his achievements without contributing to their creation. Sarah Martinez rose from the defense table with the quiet confidence of someone holding cards that no one else knew existed. The courtroom atmosphere shifted subtly as she approached the bench, carrying a thick folder that seemed modest compared to the extensive documentation Marcus's team had presented. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly, her experienced eye recognizing the measured pace that often preceded significant revelations in complex litigation. Martinez began her presentation by expressing appreciation for the court's patience and attention to detail during the plaintiff's testimony. She acknowledged that Mr. Rivera had indeed provided compelling evidence of his involvement in the restaurant business operations, but suggested that the complete picture required examination of additional documentation that had not yet been presented to the court. Her tone was respectful but carried an undertone that hinted at information that might substantially alter the proceedings. The first document Martinez presented to the court was a business loan application dated 3 months before the opening of the original Bellecourt location. The document bore official bank letterhead and authentication stamps that verified its legitimacy, but the signature line contained a name that caused audible gasps throughout the courtroom gallery. Maria Elena Rivera appeared as the sole applicant, with her personal financial information, credit history, and income projections serving as the foundation for the lending institution's approval decision. Marcus's confident expression faltered as he stared at the document being displayed for the court's examination. His whispered conversation with Jonathan Blackstone became increasingly urgent as the implications of this revelation began to register. Blackstone's previously assured demeanor showed signs of strain as he realized that fundamental assumptions about the case had been completely incorrect from the beginning. Martinez continued her methodical presentation by introducing bank records that traced the funding sources for all three original restaurant locations. The documentation revealed that Maria had received a substantial inheritance from her grandmother's estate, including property holdings and investment accounts that had provided the capital necessary to launch the restaurant venture. The inheritance had been managed through a trust account that maintained Maria's financial privacy while providing the resources that had made Marcus's entrepreneurial dreams possible. The financial forensics expert that Martinez called to testify was Dr. Patricia Hendricks, whose credentials included advanced degrees in both accounting and business analysis from prestigious universities. Dr. Hendricks explained to the court how her examination of the complete financial records had revealed patterns that contradicted the narrative presented by the plaintiff's legal team. Every major business decision, from initial location selection to equipment purchasing to staff hiring, had required written approval from Maria before implementation. Dr. Hendricks methodically walked the court through a series of internal corporate documents that showed Maria's signature authorizing expenditures, approving vendor contracts, and establishing operational policies. The financial expert explained that modern business practices typically require dual signature authority for significant transactions, and the Rivera restaurant empire had consistently followed this protocol, with Marcus and Maria serving as co-signatories on all important decisions. Martinez then presented evidence that addressed another crucial aspect of the case that had been misrepresented during Marcus's testimony. She introduced academic transcripts and degree certifications showing that Maria held a Master of Business Administration degree with a specialization in hospitality management from Cornell University's prestigious hotel school. Additional documentation revealed that Maria had completed advanced coursework in restaurant operations, financial management, and franchise development before the couple had even met. The revelation of Maria's educational background sent ripples of surprise through the courtroom gallery. Many of the restaurant industry observers who had accepted Marcus's characterization of his wife as someone lacking business sophistication found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the situation. Judge Morrison requested additional time to examine the academic credentials, noting their relevance to questions about Maria's qualifications to participate in business management decisions. Martinez continued her presentation by calling attention to vendor contracts that revealed another layer of misrepresentation in Marcus's testimony. The original agreements with food suppliers, equipment manufacturers, and service providers showed Maria's signature as the primary contact and decision-maker. Phone records and email correspondence demonstrated that vendors had consistently communicated with Maria rather than Marcus when resolving operational issues or negotiating contract modifications. The head of regional operations for their largest food supplier took the witness stand to clarify the nature of his company's relationship with the Rivera restaurants. He testified that Maria had been his primary contact from the beginning of their business relationship, handling everything from initial product selection to pricing negotiations to quality control issues. Marcus had occasionally attended meetings, but the substantive discussions and final decisions had consistently involved Maria's direct participation and approval. Marcus's attorney attempted several objections during this testimony, arguing that vendor relationships did not necessarily indicate ownership or control of business operations. Judge Morrison sustained some objections but allowed the testimony to continue, noting that the evidence was relevant to determining the actual distribution of responsibilities within the business partnership, regardless of how those responsibilities had been characterized by either party. Martinez presented additional evidence showing that Maria had been responsible for the complex logistics of opening multiple restaurant locations simultaneously. Project management documentation revealed her coordination of construction schedules, permit applications, staff recruitment, and marketing campaigns. The level of detail and sophistication demonstrated in these records contradicted any suggestion that her involvement had been limited to decorative or social functions. The testimony continued with a commercial real estate agent who had worked extensively with the Rivera restaurant expansion. She confirmed that Maria had been the primary decision-maker in identifying and securing prime locations for new restaurants. Maria had demonstrated sophisticated understanding of demographic analysis, foot traffic patterns, and market penetration strategies that had guided site selection decisions worth millions of dollars in combined real estate investments. As the afternoon session progressed, Marcus's confident demeanor continued to deteriorate. His hushed consultations with Blackstone became more frequent and urgent, while his facial expressions revealed someone gradually realizing that his understanding of fundamental facts had been completely wrong. The documents being presented were authentic, the witnesses were credible, and the evidence was building a picture that contradicted nearly everything he had told the court during his earlier testimony. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess to allow both legal teams time to review the extensive documentation that had been introduced. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus sat in stunned silence while his attorney scrambled to understand how they had proceeded to trial without knowledge of evidence that fundamentally undermined their entire case strategy. The confident predictions and celebratory toasts of the previous evening now seemed like artifacts from a different reality entirely. The afternoon session resumed with Sarah Martinez calling Elena Vasquez to the witness stand, the head chef whose culinary expertise had earned the Rivera restaurants their reputation for exceptional Mediterranean cuisine. Elena's testimony began with a simple but devastating revelation that sent shockwaves through the gallery. Every signature dish, every seasonal menu modification, and every innovative fusion element that had distinguished their restaurants from countless competitors had been conceived and developed by Maria, not Marcus. Elena explained to the stunned courtroom how Maria would arrive at the restaurants before dawn, working alongside the kitchen staff to test new recipes and refine existing ones. Maria's understanding of flavor profiles, ingredient sourcing, and presentation techniques had guided the development of the signature dishes that food critics had praised in reviews that elevated the restaurant's reputation throughout the region. Marcus had certainly tasted and approved the final products, but the creative process and technical execution had been entirely Maria's domain. The chef's testimony continued with details about staff training programs that Maria had designed and implemented across all restaurant locations. Elena described comprehensive protocols for food safety, preparation techniques, and presentation standards that had reduced kitchen accidents, minimized food waste, and ensured consistency that kept customers returning. Marcus had attended some training sessions, but his role had been largely ceremonial, while Maria provided the substantive instruction and oversight. Martinez called Robert Chun, the general manager of the flagship Bellecourt location, whose testimony painted an even more comprehensive picture of Maria's operational leadership. Chun explained that Maria had conducted every significant hiring decision for management positions across the restaurant empire, personally interviewing candidates and making final selections based on her assessment of their skills and cultural fit with the organization's values. Chin's testimony revealed that Maria had created the employee handbook, designed the performance evaluation systems, and established the conflict resolution procedures that had maintained unusually low staff turnover rates in an industry notorious for employment instability. She had implemented employee recognition programs, established clear advancement pathways, and negotiated benefit packages that had attracted top talent from competing establishments. The general manager described weekly strategy meetings that Maria had led, focusing on operational efficiency, customer satisfaction metrics, and revenue optimization. These sessions had been attended by department heads from all restaurant locations, with Maria providing direction on everything from inventory management to customer service standards. Marcus had occasionally attended these meetings, but typically arrived late and left early, contributing little to the substantive discussions. Martinez then called Margaret Thompson, the certified public accountant who had handled the restaurant's financial management and tax preparation for the past 6 years. Thompson's testimony provided crucial insight into the true nature of financial decision-making within the restaurant empire. She explained that Maria had been her primary contact for all accounting matters, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of cash flow management, profit margin analysis, and tax strategy optimization. Thompson testified that Maria had personally overseen the development of financial forecasting models that had guided expansion decisions and capital investments. Maria's analysis of market trends, seasonal fluctuations, and competitive positioning had informed strategic decisions about pricing, staffing levels, and inventory management. The financial success that Marcus had claimed credit for had actually resulted from Maria's careful planning and analytical expertise. The accountant revealed that Maria had established sophisticated systems for tracking performance metrics across multiple restaurant locations, identifying opportunities for operational improvements and cost reductions. Thompson described Maria as one of the most financially literate clients she had encountered, capable of analyzing complex financial reports and implementing strategic changes based on data-driven insights. Martinez called David Rodriguez, the commercial real estate agent who had assisted with the expansion of the restaurant empire from one location to 8. Rodriguez testified that Maria had been the driving force behind every real estate decision, demonstrating remarkable intuition for identifying prime locations before they became obviously valuable to other investors. She had negotiated lease terms, evaluated demographic data, and analyzed traffic patterns with the skill of a seasoned real estate professional. Rodriguez described how Maria had insisted on personally visiting potential locations at different times of day and different days of the week, observing foot traffic patterns and studying the behavior of potential customers. Her site selection decisions had proven remarkably prescient, with every location she had chosen exceeding projected revenue targets within the first year of operation. The real estate agent revealed that Maria had negotiated favorable lease terms that had saved the restaurant empire hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. She had identified opportunities for lease renewals, expansion options, and purchase agreements that had protected the business from market fluctuations and provided long-term stability for continued growth. Martinez then presented testimony from Susan Walsh, the interior designer who had created the distinctive aesthetic that unified all Rivera restaurant locations. Walsh explained that Maria had provided the creative vision and detailed specifications for every design element, from color schemes and furniture selections to lighting concepts and artwork placement. Marcus had approved the final results, but the conceptual framework and execution oversight had been entirely Maria's responsibility. Walsh described Maria's sophisticated understanding of how physical environment influenced customer behavior and dining experience. Maria had researched acoustics, traffic flow, and psychological impact of various design elements, creating spaces that encouraged longer visits and higher per-customer spending. The design success that had been featured in architectural magazines and hospitality industry publications had reflected Maria's vision and careful attention to detail. Perhaps most damaging to Marcus's credibility was the testimony of investment partner James Morrison, who had provided capital for the restaurant expansion. Morrison revealed that despite Marcus's public role as the face of the business, all substantive communications and strategic decisions had involved direct consultation with Maria. Morrison described Maria as the actual strategic leader of the organization, with Marcus serving more as a spokesperson and public relations representative. Morrison testified that his investment group had been impressed specifically by Maria's business plan presentations, financial projections, and operational expertise. When making the decision to provide expansion capital, the investors had relied primarily on their confidence in Maria's leadership capabilities and strategic vision. Marcus had been present during meetings, but the substantive discussions had focused on Maria's analysis and recommendations. Throughout this devastating testimony, Marcus attempted repeatedly to interrupt proceedings with objections and clarifications, but Judge Morrison firmly maintained courtroom order. His facial expressions revealed someone watching his entire narrative collapse as witness after witness contradicted fundamental aspects of his earlier testimony. Jonathan Blackstone appeared increasingly helpless as his client's case disintegrated under the weight of contrary evidence from credible witnesses. Martinez concluded her witness presentations by introducing security footage from business meetings that Marcus had claimed to have led personally. The video evidence showed Maria conducting detailed presentations while Marcus sat largely silent, occasionally nodding or asking basic clarification questions. The footage revealed the true power dynamics within the organization, with Maria clearly functioning as the decision-maker while Marcus played a supportive but subordinate role. Blackstone's attempts at cross-examination proved futile as each witness remained consistent under pressure, providing additional details that further supported Maria's central role in building and operating the restaurant empire. The evidence had become overwhelming. painting a picture of systematic misrepresentation that threatened not only Marcus's divorce case, but potentially his professional reputation and future business prospects. Judge Catherine Morrison had presided over thousands of cases during her distinguished career, but few had presented such a dramatic reversal of established facts as the proceedings that had unfolded over the past 3 days. She reviewed her extensive notes one final time, her expression grave as she prepared to deliver a ruling that would fundamentally reshape the lives of both parties and send ripples throughout the local business community. The packed courtroom fell into complete silence as she cleared her throat and began what would become one of the most comprehensive judicial rebukes in recent memory. The judge began her ruling by acknowledging the complexity of the evidence that had been presented and the significant discrepancies between the initial claims and the subsequent revelations. She noted that the court had been presented with what appeared to be a straightforward case of asset protection, only to discover through careful examination that the fundamental premises underlying the plaintiff's case had been systematically misrepresented from the beginning. Judge Morrison methodically reviewed the evidence that had established Maria's role as the true architect of the restaurant empire. The funding documentation clearly showed that Maria had provided the initial capital through her inheritance, making her the primary financial stakeholder from the very beginning of the enterprise. The business loan applications, banking records, and investment agreements all confirmed that Maria had been the principal applicant and decision-maker for all significant financial commitments. The judge continued by addressing the educational and professional qualifications that had been concealed during the plaintiff's testimony. Maria's Master of Business Administration degree from Cornell University, combined with her specialized training in hospitality management, clearly demonstrated the expertise necessary to develop and operate a successful restaurant enterprise. The suggestion that she lacked the knowledge or skills to contribute meaningfully to business operations had been not merely incorrect, but deliberately misleading. Judge Morrison then examined the operational evidence that had revealed the true distribution of responsibilities within the restaurant organization. The testimony from employees, vendors, contractors, and business partners had painted a consistent picture of Maria as the primary decision-maker, strategic planner, and operational leader. The court found it particularly troubling that Marcus had claimed credit for achievements that were clearly the result of Maria's vision, planning, and execution. The financial analysis presented by Dr. Hendricks had demonstrated that every major business decision required Maria's approval and signature. The court noted that modern business practices typically involved shared authority for significant transactions, but in this case the evidence showed that Maria had been the dominant decision-maker while Marcus had played a largely ceremonial role in business operations. Judge Morrison addressed the testimony regarding menu development, staff management, real estate selection, and financial planning that had revealed the comprehensive scope of Maria's contributions to the restaurant empire's success. The court found it particularly significant that industry professionals, including suppliers, contractors, and investment partners, had consistently identified Maria as their primary contact and the source of strategic direction for the organization. The judge expressed concern about the systematic nature of the misrepresentations that had been presented in Marcus's initial testimony. The evidence suggested that Marcus had deliberately concealed Maria's central role in building and operating the restaurant empire, while claiming exclusive credit for achievements that were clearly the result of her expertise and leadership. Such misrepresentation in legal proceedings constituted a serious breach of court procedures and professional ethics. Judge Morrison then announced her ruling with the authority that came from careful consideration of overwhelming evidence. The court found that Maria Rivera had been the primary architect, financial backer, and operational leader of the restaurant enterprise from its inception through its current success. Marcus Rivera had played a supporting role in the business operations, but had systematically misrepresented his level of contribution and authority. Based on the evidence presented, the court awarded Maria Rivera 100% ownership of all restaurant properties, business assets, intellectual property, and associated investments. The ruling encompassed all 8 current restaurant locations, including the flagship Bellecourt establishment, along with all equipment, inventory, vendor relationships, and employee contracts associated with the restaurant operations. Furthermore, Judge Morrison ordered Marcus Rivera to pay substantial damages to compensate for the legal expenses, lost opportunity costs, and emotional distress caused by his fraudulent claims. The court also ordered him to pay all court costs and legal fees for both parties, recognizing that his misrepresentations had necessitated extensive legal proceedings that could have been avoided through honest disclosure of the actual business arrangements. The judge's ruling continued with additional consequences that reflected the seriousness of Marcus's deceptive testimony. She ordered him to issue public corrections of his previous statements claiming credit for business achievements that had actually been Maria's accomplishments. These corrections were to be published in industry publications and posted prominently in all restaurant locations to ensure that employees, customers, and business partners understood the true nature of the organizational leadership. As Judge Morrison delivered her comprehensive ruling, Marcus's face cycled through expressions of shock, disbelief, and desperate rage. His attempts to interrupt the proceedings with objections and protests were firmly silenced by the judge, who warned that further disruptions would result in contempt of court charges in addition to the substantial penalties already imposed. The business partners and industry colleagues who had attended the proceedings to support Marcus began quietly distancing themselves as the full scope of his deception became clear. Several were overheard discussing concerns about their own business relationships with him and whether similar misrepresentations might have occurred in other contexts. The professional reputation that Marcus had cultivated over years of taking credit for Maria's achievements was crumbling in real time as the truth spread through the courtroom gallery. Meanwhile, the restaurant employees who had testified about Maria's leadership were openly celebrating the vindication of what they had known to be true throughout their employment. Head chef Elena was seen wiping away tears of relief as the judge confirmed Maria's rightful ownership of the restaurants where she had worked so hard to maintain excellence. General Manager Robert Chun smiled broadly as he realized that his actual boss had finally received the recognition she deserved. Judge Morrison concluded her ruling by commending Maria for her patience, dignity, and grace throughout proceedings that must have been emotionally devastating. The court recognized that she had endured years of having her contributions minimized and dismissed while maintaining the professionalism and dedication that had made the restaurant empire successful. Her conduct during the legal proceedings had been exemplary, demonstrating the same leadership qualities that had built a thriving business organization. Maria rose when invited to address the court, speaking with the quiet confidence that had impressed judges and juries throughout the proceedings. She thanked the court for its careful consideration of the evidence and expressed gratitude for the opportunity to have the truth finally revealed. She outlined her plans for the continued growth and development of the restaurant empire, emphasizing her commitment to the employees who had supported her and the customers who had made their success possible. Marcus made one final attempt to protest the ruling, rising from his chair with an outburst about years of hard work and dedication being ignored by a biased legal system. Judge Morrison immediately silenced him, warning that such behavior was inappropriate and would not be tolerated in her courtroom. She reminded him that his own testimony and evidence had been thoroughly examined and found to be systematically misleading, making his protests both inappropriate and futile. As the proceedings concluded, Marcus left the courtroom alone while a crowd of supporters surrounded Maria to offer congratulations and express relief that justice had finally been served. Restaurant employees, business partners, and industry colleagues who had witnessed Maria's actual contributions over the years celebrated the vindication of what they had always known to be true about her central role in the organization's success. 6 months after the court ruling, Marcus Rivera was working as an assistant manager at a competing restaurant chain, earning a fraction of his previous income while struggling to rebuild a professional reputation that had been shattered by the revelations of his systematic deception. His attempts to claim credit for achievements that had actually been Maria's had backfired spectacularly, leaving him with few options in an industry where trust and credibility were essential for success. Maria Rivera had expanded her restaurant empire to 12 locations across 3 states, with each new establishment exceeding revenue projections and earning critical acclaim for innovative cuisine and exceptional service. She had become a respected figure in the hospitality industry, sought after for speaking engagements, and consulted by other entrepreneurs who wanted to learn from her proven track record of success. The final transformation was perhaps the most satisfying of all. Maria had established a mentorship program for aspiring restaurant entrepreneurs, particularly women who faced barriers in accessing capital and recognition in the male-dominated hospitality industry. Her office walls were lined with letters from successful graduates of her program, entrepreneurs who had built their own thriving businesses with guidance from someone who truly understood both the challenges and the rewards of building something meaningful from nothing. The quiet confidence that had puzzled observers during the court proceedings had been revealed as the natural expression of someone who had always known her own worth, even when others had failed to recognize it. Maria Rivera had finally claimed her rightful place as one of the region's most successful business leaders, and the industry that had once overlooked her contributions now looked to her as an example of what could be achieved through vision, dedication, and the courage to demand the recognition that excellence deserved.